and I guess for my sins, I've been tasked with leading the UK-wide task group that's overseeing the process of implementing the age group change for the sport of athletics. And I'll talk a little bit about the process we've gone through and how we've got to where we are over the next half an hour or so. Sorry, just trying to get my... So as I mentioned, I think it's important that everyone keeps their microphones on mute if possible this evening. As you've already seen, the session will be recorded. The hope is that we can send this back out to all the delegates afterwards. So if there's anything that you haven't managed to pick up while I'm talking, you can go through and review it at your own leisure. We want this session to be as interactive as possible. So I'm sure we're all very familiar with these online webinars by now. Please put your questions into the chat or put your hand up. I'm joined by a few colleagues from Welsh Athletics this evening. So Zoe Holloway, the club organisation coordinator, is on the call. Amy Edwards, who looks after competitions and officials across North Wales, and Liz Davis, who's our coach education lead, are all on the call. So they'll be monitoring the chat and kind of reviewing any questions that come in. But at the same time, do put your hand up and ask any questions throughout. I think it's really important that this is, like I said, an interactive session. And I'm sure if you've got a question, there are other people on the call who will probably be thinking the same thing. And also, I have absolutely no doubt a number of you will kind of digest some of the information that's been shared and discussed this evening. Please do follow up with any. Please do follow up with any email to myself if you've got any specific questions that maybe we haven't been able to cover this evening, and I'll endeavour to answer any lingering questions you may have. A little bit about what we'll cover this evening, and a little bit about, I guess, what we're not going to discuss or cover this evening. So the premise of this evening's webinar is to give an update on the new age groups that will come into effect from April 2026 onwards. That will include primarily the new technical specs that each age group will have across all of the event groups. We'll touch on what the indoor season in Wales will look like for 2026, what the junior leagues will look like next summer onwards, what our championships will look like, and also the current thinking for schools athletics. And I guess just to manage expectations, this isn't a discussion about whether the age group change should happen. That discussion has happened and that decision has been made, and I'll touch on a bit around that. And also, we're not in a position now to discuss any further around the technical specifications. Again, I'll talk a little bit about as well. Sorry, guys, can we keep microphones on mute and hearing some other people's noises as well? Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about the technical specifications and how we've arrived at the current and the final technical specifications for each age group. So I hope that's okay, and I hope that manages some expectations around what this evening we'll cover. But like I said before, please do put any additional questions in the chat or put your hand up and ask as we go throughout if I am not covering some of the points that you'd hope to cover this evening. So a little bit about how we've got to this point. So in my time with Welsh Athletics, I think this is the third time that a move to change the age groups has been explored. This particular situation came on the back of a large piece of research undertaken by a company called 2CV that was commissioned by England Athletics. And the real focus of that research was looking at the dropout rate in the sport and that particular key age group of under 17s and why we were losing so many athletes from the sport. It's not something that's unique to athletics. This is a challenge that all sports are looking at, but obviously from our perspective, we wanted to look at what are the things that were the fundamental factors. And the key one that came through time and time again was the clash of education and some of those key competitions that certain age groups are having. Now, we're never going to do anything about the education season. What we can do is mitigate how the sport competes against those educational reviews. And I must stress that research and this age group change is part of a wider piece of work that the 4 home countries in the UK are doing to look to improve retention and improve engagement with young people across the sport in the UK. I think it's also important just to note, for those who maybe aren't aware, World Athletics and every other nation in the world currently adopts even age groups. The one caveat is they all adopt the age group starting on the 1st of January. We're not looking to do that, and I'll touch on that in a little bit. And as I mentioned, we've gone through 2 years now of extensive consultation with the sports, and this must be about the 15th or 16th webinar that I've chaired over the last couple of years, where we've been going out and speaking to various stakeholders across the sport. That involves whether this change should happen, but also part of the kind of technical specification that's been discussed and discussed at length. And ultimately, all decisions rest with the Board of UKA, who are the ultimate arbiters of the rules and the sport in general. So, albeit we make the recommendations as the task group to the Board of UKA, and that's checked and challenged by the rules revisory group. Ultimately, it's the Board of UKA that make a decision, and they've supported this process up until this point. And like I said, we're working now towards implementing fully the age group change from April 2026 onwards. And because of the geographical location, Wales and England, we tend to have a lot of crossover, and we've tried to align as closely as possible. Lots of the Welsh athletes compete across English competitions, and I'm sure many of you were in Birmingham on the weekend for the English, the de facto British under-15, under-17 champs, and a lot of our clubs compete against English clubs in the YDL, and lots of English athletes come over to compete in Wales. So really, really important that I think there's close alignment with the decisions that are made in England and with Wales. And we've been working very, very closely with colleagues in England throughout this process. I'll talk a little bit about this slight different approach in Scotland and an existing challenge in Northern Ireland with the fact that lots of their athletes compete in Ireland, who of course adopt World Athletics age groups. And I think that's an interesting point to kind of raise at this point as well. World Athletics set the rules for the sport, but World Athletics ultimately don't go further than under 18. So then UK Athletics have their own rule book, which tends to fill in the gaps on those areas that World Athletics don't look at. And there are some specific rules for the sport here in the UK. And historically, the odd age groups that the sport currently operates was one of the key anomalies. But in recent years, and for some of the officials on the call, I'm sure you'd have seen a closer alignment with the World Athletics rulebook and the UKA Athletics rulebook, and I can only see that alignment carrying on in the years ahead. And like I said, Welsh Athletics, as one of each of the home countries, signs up to be to adopt the rules of the sport in the UK rulebook. That's written into our articles. We don't necessarily have the ability to step outside of that. We can make them tougher in certain situations, but as a rule of thumb, we adopt the UK rulebook in its totality. And as I mentioned, there's a rules advisory group which is independent to the board, independent to each of the home countries that reviews all rule proposals, and we're in that process now where there'll be a new rulebook in April 2026, and not just the age group change, but lots of different rules are being looked at. And to stress, the changes we're making, bringing in even age groups, that this is the change that we're looking to make. We are not, and I do stress this because this has been one of the more contentious issues throughout, we are not looking to fully align with World Athletics' age groups, which take a January the 1st approach, for two fundamental reasons. Firstly, it would cut right in the middle of the cross-country season, and we've always struggled to understand how we can apply that rule for the cross-country season here in the UK, or certainly here in Wales. And also for schools as well. You would have a situation where an athlete would be in one age group for the first half of the academic year and a different age group for the second half of the academic year. So for those reasons alone, we're not looking to move any further beyond the proposed change for April of this year. So hopefully that brings some comfort, because like I said, our sport loves a rumour, and that's definitely been one that's been doing the rounds since this whole process started, that we're not looking to move to adopt World Athletics age groups. So, like I said, new rules will come into effect from 1st of April, adopting the even age groups. The rules of competition will now go down as far as under 10, and under 10s and under 12s will be referenced in the rule book, but more around the limitations on what an under 10 and under 12 athletes can't do. The specifics around what we think they should do, that will sit in each of the home countries' websites as part of our kind of competition development aspect. And that's more around the long-term development of young athletes, and I'll touch on a little bit of that right at the end of this presentation. The cut-off dates will be 31st of August. Now that's exactly as we currently are with the sport in the UK. The one change, we're also going to apply that cut-off date for cross-country as well. So if anybody's seen the rule book, you'll see that there's a different a cut-off date for cross-country, for mountain, for trail, for the age groups, for track and field. It's as clear as mud. So we're trying, where we can, to provide some consistency for the sport. So essentially, when you start in an age group, you'll continue in that age group for the rest of that calendar year. That being said, because of the way trail and mountain operate and some of the alignment with World Athletics, we're actually not proposing that change comes into effect for mountain and trail. I think at the moment that would be too much of a change, but certainly for cross country and for road and for track and field, we'll have some consistency. And of course, the change from under 20 to senior happens at 31st of December in the way that it currently does. So no change in the way you exit from being under 20 to a senior athlete, albeit because of the way we've essentially created an extra age group. The time between being a top age under 18 and a top age under 20 will be much smaller, but also the event progressions will be far closer. So hopefully that transition from under 18 to under 20 to under 23 to senior will be much easier for some of those athletes in some of those technical events. So that's a little overview around some of the key fundamental points as we work through the rest of the technical information. And another thing that we're also trying to do as part of this, and yes, we need to update all the technical information, ensure that coaches, athletes, parents, officials know what the technical spec is. But also we've tried to use this process to talk a little bit about how we also hope to develop the event groups and also hope to put in place the right kind of underpinning philosophies and behaviours. And one of the things that we're keen to ensure is young athletes, under 10s, under 12s, they're in this sport and they have fun and they enjoy it, and we don't kind of drive for the sport to be too serious too quickly. And as a result of that, we have requested that under 10s, under 12s do not appear on Power of 10. There won't be any ranking list, so an athlete shouldn't be looking to constantly chase a performance to get higher up the rankings at those age groups. That will come later on in their athletics career, but certainly we hope for those early years that it's more around fun and more around kind of those young athletes just enjoying themselves and developing themselves and learning the sport as they move forward. And just a little bit about all the historical rankings. They'll all be retained, all the historical kind of all-time lists. They'll all be retained. They'll all be available on Power of 10 should anybody wish to access it. But obviously from 1st of April, the new age groups will come into effect for Power of 10, and the all-time list will start essentially with the new age groups from that way forward. So I now intend going through each of the event group areas in turn and talking a little bit about the new technical specifications that will come on board. Now, I have to stress at this point, a lot of the technical changes obviously relate to those events like hurdles, like throws. Some of the kind of running events will obviously carry on in their existing formats, but it'll just give you an indication of where we currently are. And I guess as well, just to provide a bit of confidence as to how certain technical specifications have been, how we've landed on certain technical specs around throwing weight or a hurdle height. As I mentioned, I chair the whole UK-wide task group, and that's made up of representatives of UK athletics and each of the home countries. We also recruited through an open process several independents, and they've been crucial in keeping us in check, bringing their specific expertise in. So we've had individuals that have talked around long-term athlete development, athlete maturation, but also some technical experts in some of those event groups. And also, every time we've had a question or a query posed to us, we've tried to establish specific event groups that have gone in, delved into that information and that question in a bit more detail. And again, we've brought through more technical experts into some of those discussions. So there's been a specific group that's looked at hurdles with a number of hurdle coaches and hurdle athletes that have been involved in that. Similar process for throws and a similar process for combined events and jumps as well. We've also had a group that's looked specifically at how do we ensure that power integration is not just maintained but enhanced. We've had a group that's been looking at specifically around some of the IT challenges, Power of 10, competition provider, entry processes, results platforms, etc. A group that's looked exclusively at off-track, and that's had members from the trail running community, the road running community, mountain, fell, etc. And then a historical group that's looked at records and how do we ensure that historical records are safeguarded and new records can come on board from April onwards. And throughout, we've been continuously liaising with, as I mentioned, that rules advisory group that's continually asked us questions, challenged us back, where required, have pushed for further consultation. So hopefully everyone can see that this isn't something that, you know, a group of home country executives have sat in the room and thought, let's do this, and this is how it's going to be. We've tried to go above and beyond with bringing in independence to check and challenge the process. And we're continuing those conversations with competition providers on an ongoing basis as well, both on a local and a national level. And like I said, all of this process has now been approved by the Board of UK, and we're now in a position where we can share some of this. And in the last couple of weeks, I can tell you that all the technical specs have been confirmed. The way the rulebook will be written has now been confirmed for those technical aspects. So we can begin to share some of the formalities of that with individuals within the sport. So it'll enable officials to plan, coaches to plan, and obviously athletes and parents to plan accordingly. And I guess as we look at the next couple of slides, I come back to that's not just looking at the technical aspects of age group change, but also how do we ensure that we use this as a process to develop event groups and to develop athletes over a longer period. So some, as you can see on the screen, some overarching principles around providing flexibility for competition providers, ensuring that any changes are appropriate from a health and safety perspective. It enables competition providers to be more creative, more flexible with their offering, ensuring that we use existing equipment. What we didn't want to do is come up with a range of technical specs and then that would indicate a large cost burden for either competition providers, for facility operators, or for clubs. So we've tried to use where possible, and I think we have used where possible, existing equipment, so existing implements or existing equipment to ensure that the new technical specifications can be used. And albeit we haven't finalized the number of events per day that an athlete of a specific age group can do, we have posed those questions. Why do we have these limitations on athletes of a certain age group? We've engaged some expertise from universities to look at that specific question. There isn't any clear answer as to why we have limitations on certain events. But again, we're now using that to challenge that process to enable the sport to be far more led by what the athletes and the coaches and the parents and the officials think is needed, as opposed to some historical binary decision. But as it currently stands in that space, essentially the limitations that are in place for under 13 athletes will apply for under 14s, and under 15s will apply for under 16s. But we'll talk a little bit about that as we go on. So I'm going to work my way through now each of the event group areas. And essentially, as I mentioned, for some of the running events, very little change. So you can see there that a lot of the current distances are in play for the new age groups, but again, some optional race distances to enable athletes to, either competition providers to have different race distances, or bearing in mind certain athletes mature at different stages. Potentially an under 20 athlete could do a 300 meter as opposed to a runner 400 meters if they felt that was right for them. But a big change obviously is around hurdle heights and hurdle spacings, and I'll come on to that a little bit. And yes, some of the hurdle heights, some of the spacings will go out, but essentially we're also trying to keep the hurdle height lower for longer, because again, hurdles is one of those events where we can have some brilliant athletes, but if they don't grow and mature in line with the hurdle height changing, then we often see athletes either stepping away from that event group or stepping away from the sport because they simply can't reach the required hurdle height. So again, this has been an area that we've had a lot of expertise looking at, and they've come up with the new specifications, and I'll come on to that in a little bit. So there you go. So these are the outdoor specifications for sprint hurdles and for the long hurdles. You will also see the potential, and I do stress this is a potential at this stage, to introduce a 200 meter hurdle distance. So again, will enable athletes, if they want to become a long hurdler, this could be their first opportunity to step into that. 200 hurdles or 220 yards hurdles was an event historically. So a lot of the markings already exist on tracks. So again, we can hopefully introduce that in time without necessarily changing the linings or the markings on tracks. So again, the overarching principle is that, you know, a lot of the hurdle heights stay roughly the same, but the spacings will increase, but the hurdle heights will hopefully stay lower for longer to enable those athletes to develop technically and progress at their own speed a little bit better than the current offering has. And again, similar for indoors as well. Now, I know we've got some hurdle coaches on the call, so I wasn't sure if there's any specific questions that anybody wanted to ask at this stage, or if we wanted to wait until the end. So you're going to have to tell me if anybody's got their hands up or if there's any questions in the chat.
There's no hands or no questions in the chat.
Okay. Well, I'll carry on unless I'm told differently. And again, this slide is almost exclusively around how do we ensure the competition providers and league providers have some flexibility around one of the best aspects for me of any competition day, a relay. So again, we really want to encourage providers to be more flexible, certainly in those junior events, to provide more relay opportunities. And these are some of the options which will come into the rulebook going forward to enable providers to be able to deliver this with a bit more certainty. With endurance, obviously there's very little change on endurance. I'll talk about off-track endurance shortly. The only thing that we're looking to introduce with endurance is the potential of introducing the 1200 meter steeplechase at under 14 age group as a development event. So again, introducing athletes to steeplechase at a bit of a younger age to hopefully improve the depth and the take-up of that event in time, but obviously a much shorter distance than has been offered previously. One thing just to kind of stress at this point, you'll see for under 10s and potentially for under 12s, the 400 meters is listed as an event group that they can do. But if I were to flick back to some of the sprints slides, you will see that the maximum distance an athlete can do doesn't include 400. That's because we're classing 400 for this age group as an endurance event. And that's an important point to make. Yes, an athlete can do 400 meters, but that will be classed as an endurance event for those age groups. As a long sprint, we don't think 400 meters is appropriate for an under 10s or under 12 athlete. And that's largely similar and in line with what's currently in place. And like I said, just hoping to provide more flexibility for competition providers, but essentially very little change to what's currently on offer for the existing age groups. And similar thing with steeplechase and race war. Both event groups are areas that we're looking to develop in the years ahead. And a little bit about off track. So again, the recommended distances do differ depending on what surface. Again, a lot of this has been consulted and advised by certain groups, but essentially there should be a lot of direct alignment with what's currently on offer off track and what the proposed new maximum distances are on going forward. The age on the day process that applies to road races, if you think lots of athletes have to enter road races several months in advance, and the age in which they enter and the age in which the event takes place sometimes differs significantly. So there is a caveat around age on the day that will carry on for off-track road events going forward as well. And again, from a jumps perspective, very little change on what we've had previously. Again, that stress around the potential to introduce new events to develop the event groups. So you'll see some standing long jumps available for under 10s and also under 12s, but also the ability to deliver long jump for under 10s as well, if there was a desire to do that. To develop the triple jump, there's opportunities to put in kind of new, I guess they're pseudo drills, the 5-bound combo. There's also some discussions around introducing vault into the sandpit. So an opportunity to that first step to introduce someone to pole vault. All of these things are being looked at. All of these things will be able to be delivered by competition providers if they should wish to do so going forward as well. And from a combined events perspective, obviously they'll have to take on board the new technical specs around hurdles and throw-in weights that I'll come on to shortly. But again, there's a real desire to try to develop those event groups and to provide more flexibility with competition offering. So again, triathlons or three event opportunities, or quadrathlons, pentathlons, indoors and out. Lots more flexibility for competition providers, and all of this will be written into the rule book going forward as well. And that just essentially summarises what we've just currently said. And then throwing weights for the throws events. This is probably the area where there's obviously more change than probably most of the events. And essentially what we're looking to put in place here is that an athlete will throw with a lighter weight for longer, with the ultimate aim of learning the technique and progressing at a more gradual rate than is currently on offering. The one caveat is discus, where there's very little change between the lower weights and the upper weights because of how, it's only a 1K female discus, for example. But in the main, the overarching principle is an athlete will throw with a lighter weight for longer and ultimately learn the technique over a much longer period. So again, a greater desire around that long-term athlete development, listening to the feedback of the coaches, more importantly, listening to the feedback of some of the athletes as well, who really sometimes struggle when they have to step up an age group and ultimately step up a throw-in implement weight as well. And like I said, to develop the event group, we're going to explore allowing under 12s to throw with a 2K hammer, and the 2K hammer hasn't been readily available, but it is an available implement. So that's probably an area where maybe clubs or competition providers or facilities may need to stock up more on 2K hammers. It's probably a good opportunity to mention the Be Active Wales funding. Clubs can access up to £50,000 of funding on an annual basis. Equipment is fundamental to that. So as a club, if you do an audit and you identify gaps in the existing or the new throwing weights, please do use that fund, because essentially Sport Wales funding can be used then to ensure that the club has sufficient implements going forward as well. And that reflects on all facility equipment requirements. And then just a little bit there then around the kind of diameters and the finer spec for shot put and discus going forward, and for hammer and javelin going forward as well. Just also bear in mind that the specification for javelin from a World Athletics perspective has changed this year as well. So that's another consideration that will be factored into this going forward as well. Again, any questions on specific to throws before I move forward? Again, Zoe, I'm going to look at you.
Yes, we have had a question. Robert Eels said, under 12 shot states a range of weights, question mark.
Bear with me, go back.
Yeah, if you look at it, it says 2 to 2 points.
Yeah, sorry. So that's for under 12. So essentially, that will largely depend on the athlete you've got in front of you. So with under 12s, remember, it's all about enjoyment and developing those athletes. So if there's a feeling that a 2K shot put is better for that athlete because of their physical stature, from a technical perspective, then you can use that. So certainly that just provides that flexibility. We'll come back to you on what that will mean from a competition perspective, because we've got a couple of different options for competitions for under 12s. But essentially, everything in yellow is an optional aspect, with everything in green being what will be in the rule book. So you won't see anything in yellow listed as a technical spec in the rule book. That will be listed on our website as a competition development tool for clubs and for competition providers to use. But the technical specs you'll see for under 14s upwards in the rule book. Does that make sense, Rob?
Yeah, I think it probably just needs further clarity.
Yeah. I'm going to assume it would need further clarity around what the competition requirements likely to be, because I know lots of throws coaches use heavier weights or lighter weights depending on different training techniques. But we'll come back to you on that. Did you have any other queries specific to throws?
The only other one would have been that there seems to be a different. So this seems to set out that under 12s potentially could have a competition in hammer up to the competition provider.
Yeah, I think there was a feeling that. So originally we didn't have anything for hammer. We felt under 12s was too young for hammer. But then through the discussions with some of the coaches that are involved in the consultation, they felt, well, if an athlete wants to learn the technique of hammer, they should have the ability to do that. Hence why it's now been brought in as an optional.
Right.
You'll also see like push throw and howler is the preferred throwing events for those event groups, more on the fun side and kind of an element of, well, I was going to say an element of technique development, but again, I'm often told howler is not the best one to develop a technique for javelin. It's more around engagement with young athletes. But yeah, there was certainly then a feeling that if a young person comes to the club and wants to learn technique around hammer, and based around the assessment of that coach, they felt they were physically able to lift and do the techniques with a 2K hammer. Why wouldn't we allow that? Right. So that's the reason why that's been brought in. But unlikely that there would be, you would see an under 12 hammer competition take place. But again, there's an opportunity to go to someone top age under 12 who joins your training group, wants to learn that in preparation for future years, then we should be able to facilitate that. Okay,
but it would be a definite for under 14s now.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Brilliant. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for that. So that pretty much concludes the technical specs. So again, if there are anybody else with any specific questions around what you've seen this evening, I know there's a lot of information on there, and you might need time to digest. But if anybody does have any specific questions around that, happy to answer that now. Failing that, I'll move on to some specific aspects around the competition structures in Wales and the indoor season, etc. My cursor appears. So originally, when we were looking at the indoor season for 2026, there were some discussions, and we did discuss this at length with our track and field committee, around potentially introducing the new age groups for some of the technical events, for shot put and hurdles in particular, in the indoor season in 2026. The reason was that there's a potential for an athlete to have an existing weight or an existing hurdle height or hurdle distance coming to the end of this summer, would essentially have to learn a new hurdle height or distance for the indoor season, and then a new one again for the outdoor season in 2026 when the age group would come in. So we were trying to alleviate that. So that was our original premise. But through discussions with a number of coaches, a number of athletes, and that point I mentioned right at the start around the alignment we have here in Wales with England, and lots of athletes in Wales will go and compete in England, and lots of athletes in England come to compete in Wales. So the Junior Indoor Open, for example, that takes place in Nyack in January, also has the Southwest of England events. The events that take place in North Wales often have some of the English athletes compete and all this type of stuff. So we felt it was important to have parity across with England. And England have made it very clear that they're going to continue with the current age groups as we currently are through the indoor season and start officially from 1st of April next year. And what we didn't want was our athletes to be at a disadvantage, or for there to be some confusion where they compete in Wales and one distance, go across the board and have to compete in a totally different distance or technical spec. So we felt that was potentially putting Welsh athletes at a disadvantage. So with that in mind, the current thinking, I think now the final thinking, is for the indoor season 2026, which essentially starts in November in many cases, we'll carry on with the current age groups, under 13, under 15, 17s and 20s. And we'll continue with that, with the age group change essentially coming in, as I've mentioned a few times tonight, from 1st of April. That being said, we know there are some competition providers that want to start looking ahead. I want to start piloting certain things. So do reach out if there's a competition provider or a club that wants to, like I said, test the new hurdle heights or the new throwing weights, or be it indoors or outdoors prior to April. Do reach out to us and we will be happy to work with you on that, delivering some pilot events. Good for us to get some learning, good for the athletes to get some early engagement with maybe new throwing weights or hurdle heights, and obviously for the officials to test the new process as well. But that's our current thinking. We'll carry on with the same age groups through the indoor season. So you'll stay in the same age group as you would do, and then the age group change will come into effect from April. Again, happy to field any questions that anybody may have specifically around that, or any specific points?
I have got a question, James, from Sue Hooper. Question for AOB. Do you want me to take it now?
It depends how complicated it is.
Start rules are currently different between UK and school track events. With the new rules, will there be parity between UK and school age group start rules?
It's from Rob, it is, James, not me.
It's always the starter community, a complicated one. I think that I know you've written to us previously on this, and we've put this through to the rules group. I don't think we've had a definitive answer yet, so I'm gonna have to come back to you, I'm afraid, on that one. But that's a good reminder, and I will chase up the rules group for a steer on that. Okay, I'm gonna push on. So Welsh Championships going forward. So whereas currently we run from under 13 through to senior, essentially we're going to start from under 14s up. So there'll be an under 14s, 16s, 18s, under 20s, and obviously senior championships, Welsh Championships. That will be this case for cross country and cross country, road relays, and on the track. So we won't have a championships for under 12. And again, the junior leagues have been very, very successful. We have one in Southwest, Southeast, and across North Wales, which are definitely growing and definitely engaging more and more young people. Discussions with the North and the Southeast. I haven't had definitive discussions yet with the West, just some early kind of informal dialogue. But essentially, we'd look to adopt a similar format going forward. So whereas they're currently under 11, 13, 15, they'll become under 12, under 14, under 16 going forward as well. And for under 18s, under 20s, the feedback we're getting is they want shorter, sharper competitions that's more flexible for their requirements. So definitely our aim is to continue to build and enhance the event-specific competition format going forward. In fact, there's one this evening in Aberdeen, an endurance event. And I mentioned throughout how for under 10s, under 12s, we want to ensure that the sport remains fun, remains kind of informal. So to build on that, we are looking to launch a new informal competition offering that will potentially run all year round for under 10s, under 12s. And early thinking is it'll follow something very similar to Quad Kids, or a sprint, a jump, a throw, be it a howler or something similar, a relay, and potentially an endurance run. So what we'll have is an informal offering. So maybe those athletes that are brand new, that can just want to learn or get used to competition, there'll be that informal offering. And maybe for those kids that have been in the sport for 2 years at that point, top of the age group under 12s, that maybe have want something a bit more structured, then the junior league will be able to offer that. So for under 12s, we'll have a hybrid approach that hopefully will enable everyone to have access to something. And I know with the junior leagues, there's still a large focus around development and fun aspects for those lower age groups. But that hybrid approach is going to be rolled out over the next period. And we hope that informal structure will start from April onwards as well. So that's a little bit about the structures of competitions. I know YDL is still finalising theirs. So their AGM will take place this year. I know Joyce Tamala's on the call. Joyce, I'm not sure if you've got any insight around what their thought process is at this point. But I know with YDL, obviously nothing will be confirmed until they've had their AGM. But certainly, I wanted to just give an update on the Welsh side. Oh, Joyce, I can see your name's just popped up.
James, we haven't had anything from YDL, as you said. The meeting, the committee meeting is coming up shortly, and all I can say is if you're going to attend the YDL AGM, I think it'll be lively this year, and bring a packed lunch. No comment. I don't sit on YDL committee anymore, but just I suspect some of the clubs, not necessarily our clubs, but I'm sure some of you will know who I'm referring to.
There we are. Good stuff. You hear it here first. Bring a packed lunch. So that's a little bit about the obviously the domestic competition structure in Wales going forward. And then schools athletics is probably the last kind of piece of the jigsaw. And I'm sure some of you are more than aware of some of the discussions that have taken place across the border. And I'd probably say this has been one of the big contentious issues throughout this whole process. There's no point kind of backing away from that. Now, a couple of kind of principles here. Now, any event that's licensed in Wales must adhere to the new to the rules of the sport, must adhere to the new age groups. Now, I think all of us would have a desire to avoid any confusion where a young person, an athlete at a club event, has one set of hurdle heights, race distances, throwing weights, and something different in schools athletics. So for us, and the conversations we've had throughout with Welsh Schools, the executive, is that they are inclined to adopt the new age groups in its totality, and that's a situation that's echoed with Scotland and Ireland. And indeed, the cup and plate competition currently uses a version of the age groups that we're moving to with under 14s and under 16s. That being said, as I've mentioned, throughout this whole process, the one kind of lingering question is, what are English schools going to do? And English schools, as we currently stand, after 2 years of dialogue, are still saying they will not adopt the new age groups. Now, I think that will create utter chaos for the young athletes in England, but that's ultimately English schools' decision. Now, also at the same time, English schools have been quite adamant that they don't want to see any changes to SIAB competitions. So SIAB is the British Schools competition that the top two athletes in Wales, Scotland, Ireland, and England compete in. So obviously, if SIAB doesn't change because English schools don't want it to change, then that puts Welsh athletes and all the Celtic nation athletes in a tricky position. So that's why we're not in a position as of yet to absolutely state categorically Welsh schools will adopt the new age groups. But all the indications are that we foresee Welsh schools adopting the new age group. But we'll keep working with them. We'll keep working with Welsh schools. We'll support colleagues in England with discussions around the wider schools athletics. But certainly, from our perspective, we don't want there to be any unnecessary confusion in the sport where there's one set of guidelines for one aspect of the sport and something different for another. But again, I didn't want to provide anything. I didn't want to give a definitive if the situation should change early in the new year. So that's why I'm being a little bit kind of cagey with my position on that. And that's it from myself. Happy now to take on any questions that anybody's got across anything you've heard or any views, any opinions. I guess just one other bit just to kind of throw in, because this process hasn't been straightforward, not that I expected it to be. But since we've gone through this whole process and signed off on the changes, one extra change to keep me on my toes and colleagues on their toes, Scottish Athletics have put forward that they will adopt World Athletics age groups. So they will take on January the 1st as an age group. So our desire to make the sport as simple as possible has had a bit of a spanner thrown in the works, but at the same time, I come back to that point. Welsh and English athletics, that's historically where the crossover is. Our athletes are more likely to compete in England with English clubs in league competitions and championship competitions than they are when they go and compete in Scotland. So hopefully it'll have zero impact on the sport here in Wales. But again, I think it's important that everyone's aware of the different positions that each of the nations are taking. But I'll pause there for any questions that anybody may have. I may have bamboozled you with speaking non-stop for 45 minutes. Okay, well, if there aren't any other questions, I know it's a sweltering evening. I'm sure lots of people would want to kind of cool off. We'll look to stop the meeting and end the meeting there. Like I said at the start, do reach out to us if you've got any further questions that you didn't want to ask tonight. Either drop myself an email or Zoe or Amy from a North Wales specific perspective. Our hope is we've recorded this session, as you all know. We'll share this information with you. We'll also put on the email that will come out to you all a link to a page that all the home countries are signposting everyone to, which is on England Athletics' website, through one version of the truth. We didn't want 4 websites to say 4 slightly different bits of information. And that's basically got a blow-by-blow account of everything I've talked about this evening, with some additional FAQs, and also some links to some additional drop-in webinars. So if you do have any kind of additional questions, you think, oh, I just want to ask this, and I could really do with speaking to someone, there's some additional drop-in webinars that the 4 home countries are collectively delivering, where any question can be asked, and hopefully you'll get an answer. Zoe, I can see there's some additional questions have come in. Is there anything